It's popular and ubiquitous, relaxed and relatively democratic. In its various forms, it welcomes the well-heeled and the scruffy, the old and the young, the native and the immigrant into its air-conditioned interior. In many cities, it's actually replaced the old downtown areas as the place of preference for shopping expeditions. But it's also growing in importance as a meeting place, an entertainment centre, an indicator of the passing seasons and holidays. Is the mall a sign of our times? Obviously, it's not an isolated phenomenon. The mall is itself a symbol of capitalism, a monument to consumption, and as such, it's the envy of much of the rest of the world. There's never been a system that's delivered so many good things to such a multitude of people. But having consumed what the mall has to offer, are we ever satisfied?
To start to talk about the mall, you want to first start with what's its place in the built environment, what's its place in the urban fabric of our cities and our towns and our countrysides. And when you look at the mall in that respect, what you see is how the mall has replaced what has traditionally been the center of the town or the main street. In traditional America, in the urban fabric of the small towns throughout the nation and in the large cities, the downtown shopping district, the town square, the main street, was the center of focus of life. What the mall has done is replace that. The mall has taken an element from that, specifically the shopping part of it, and brought it out of the city.
Before coming to study for the ministry at Columbia Theological Seminary, Doug Ferguson worked as an architect in a large commercial firm.
When an architect begins to design a mall or a strip shopping center, there are several layers of things that they're trying to do. On the one hand, they're trying to attract the person in the car. And that's why it's no accident that the parking lot is out front and people can see that. And the parking lot is always well lighted and well landscaped to provide some sense of friendliness and to be inviting to bring it in. But then on the inside, what the architect is trying to do is to design a beautiful street, the kind of place that in your mind you want to stroll down and window shop. And that's why you see the park benches and the plants and so many of the nice materials on the ground. But it's all done in a pseudo-urban kind of setting. So you have pavers on the floor, and you have the illusion of having natural light above with lots of skylights pouring the light into the space, and the trees, street lamps that go down it. So what the architect wants to do is create the illusion that you are downtown. I think what the mall really does is it provides us a place of haven. It's, in a sense, it's walls that protect us from everything that's outside. People will come to the mall and feel very safe. They can't go downtown and do that. And so at the mall, they feel like I can walk unencumbered. I don't have to look over my shoulder. I feel very safe and protected here. And in a way, the mall provides a sense of security. In another sense, it's a place, it's a better environment. It's always clean. It's always light and airy. There's always music playing in the background or the sound of water babbling. There are beautiful plants and trees. So it becomes almost a garden. It's a place of refuge that we come in to escape some of the things that are happening outside of the walls. The mall also gives us a place where we mark time, where we see the year progress. And although we don't gather with the same sense of community, we're still drawn to the mall to help us mark some of those occasions and events. We show up at the mall for all of our holidays, for the back-to-school sale, for the 4th of July sale, for the Memorial Day sale. You particularly see it with events such as Christmas and Easter, where so many activities go on. The decorations change. There are festivals that go on throughout the mall. And people come there to experience that. I think particularly Christmas in America, the mall is part of the Christmas experience. It wouldn't be Christmas if you didn't go and make your way through the crowds at the mall. Or part of the whole Christmas tradition is finding a parking place at the mall. And that's become the story that you share at Christmas of what a great experience I had down at the mall. And people come not just to shop during those times of times. They come to see the seasons change, to see that the events have changed and that Santa is sitting in the chair, and 3 months later or so, the Easter Bunny will be. And so we mark our time that way.
The word mall once meant simply a large open space. But some critics of American culture, like Presbyterian minister Ed Loring, believe that in our time it represents a great narrowing of human experience and concern. Ed is one of the founding members of the Open Door, a Christian community in Atlanta that works among the poor and homeless.
It is very simple to be a human being. We are not real complex, except as we want to use complexity as a way to veil and hide ourselves from our own simplicity. What we want in our lives is enough to be loved and to love, to have good work to do and rest. All of us. The Christian faith is a proclamation to the answer and illumination and embodiment and incarnation of those human concerns that can either twist us and make us worshipers of idols, or can redeem us and make us mature women, mature men of covenant and life together. People go into the malls because they're hungry and they're thirsty for righteousness, for justice. But they believe because they have been taught. They think because they have heard that in technological efficiency and the products of a consumer society, they may have a good life, a powerful life, an impotent life, a potent life, a life that is filled with meaning. And so we get at this paradox that if in fact you walk in the name of the cross, away from the cross, though you may be crucified, it's not a redemptive crucifixion. So that one way to look at the malls and the life of people that go on in the malls is not tragic, but pathetic. A tragic life would be to go to Grady Hospital and not meet Jesus. Jesus isn't in the malls. Can't meet him there. Living here on Ponce de Leon and every day of our lives together here at the Open Door community, we feed 250 to 400, maybe 450 people every day. We live our lives in the context of hunger. We also live our lives in the context of abundance and affluence and so much food and access to resources. And right down here on Ponce de Leon, just a few blocks here from our home, there is a little stop-and-go market named Starvin' Marvin. The name of that store always grasps me as a very, very important symbol of the realities that so many of us experience in our lives, especially those of us who are well and overfed, and especially of those of us who know daily the reality of the promise of the 23rd Psalm, I shall not want. And it has to do with the spiritual power of capitalism. Capitalism has a force in it that can make even the most well-to-do feel like they're poor. Capitalism has the spiritual capacity to make people experience in their own lives scarcity. I have talked to Presbyterians who say I'm poor. I've talked to students who have said I don't have enough money. I have heard debates on the floor of Presbytery where people experience themselves on the edge of starvation, so that starving Marvin, starving Ed, starving Beth, starving Jesus, starving Mary reaches out and grasps us, though for most of us, one of our primary tasks in life is how may I reduce my calories? How can I lose a little weight? Why is it that when God says, you got enough? Don't worry about 5 loaves and a couple fishes. Just get the people to sit down over here in groups of 50 and you feed them. No, Lord, we got to send them into town quick. Nightfall's coming. They're going to be hungry. No, that's enough. It's the gospel promise. One of the issues that we as theologians and we as shepherds of flocks must encounter in our lives is the way that capitalism and the forces of American life, consumerism, has the power to make us feel as though we are starving Marvin, when in fact we are people with more than enough that can dance the dance around the Lord's table and know that the cup shall be filled, that the loaf will be renewed. Starving Marvin is a symbol of hell. And my question is, why does Marvin have his hands so firm around our tummies? Can't we ask him to let us go?
The signs and the symbols that you see in the mall, you could read that as a sign of an overt consumerism, of a people just obsessed with wanting to have more and more and more. And yet often I think people come through the mall not with the intent of having those things, but with the intent of just experiencing them. People window shop in the mall. People come there to be reminded maybe of what's possible. The mall says, come here and have something to eat and meander along our beautiful streets and have a quiet time reflecting with a friend and maybe buy something while you're here. So it's doing a different kind of thing. And I don't think there's really anything wrong with that. Certainly there's always something wrong when we go into our havens and totally escape the realities that are lying outside. But I believe that people use this as a haven which they can go into and in a sense divorce themselves from some of the problems that are going on. It's in a way a place of renewal, a place of seeing that this is all out there and available to me somehow. And that for some people that could be inspiring.
One of the wonderful gifts of life for people of faith is the Bible. The Bible is just one of the most powerful and loving and great gifts that God has given to men and women and boys and girls. It's a dangerous gift. It cuts and slices, it hurts and harms, it heals and restores. And among the scriptures that continue to feed us and to lead us back from our sense of scarcity and starvation to the abundant welcome table to which Jesus calls and invites us is the Matthew 25:31-46 passage. When did you see me, a stranger, and welcome me into your homes? When did you see me hungry and you fed me? When did you visit me in prison? When was I tattered and naked and you clothed me? When you've done it unto the least of these sisters and the least of these brothers of mine, you've done it unto me, says Jesus. I think that story, I think the Good Samaritan story of simply not passing by. Don't pass your neighbor by, my friend. Don't pass your neighbor by. Love your neighbor as yourself. Don't pass your neighbor by. I think those are scriptures that we must appropriate in our lives. We live in such a segregated society. The mall is a phenomena of class and race segregation. Suburbia is a consequence of those people who did not have the balls and the guts enough to stay close to the crucified Christ in the city and say with Luther, here I stand, there's nowhere for me to go but to this Christ who calls me on the cross. We live in the midst of segregation, horrendous, death-dealing segregation. And the Good Samaritan parable raises a question for a man like me. I am a white, male, Christian theologian, and fundamental to my life is how may I become a Samaritan? It's not just so simple that you stop and get somebody out of the ditch. You got to become a Samaritan. Can't be a Levite, can't be a priest, can't be an uncle, can't be a niece. You got to be a Samaritan. That's hard for a white man. But those scriptures call us to a new way of life, and the gift itself is life and passion and hope and dance and love-making and feasting and wonderful, 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 wonderful stuff.
Well, with me to talk some more about the mall and the role that it plays in our lives are two colleagues here at Columbia Theological Seminary. Lucy Rose is Professor of Preaching and Worship, and Shirley Guthrie is Professor of Systematic Theology. So, Lucy, do you actually enjoy shopping?
Yes, I do. It's a very introverted thing that I do, and I like to go find bargains. So about twice a year, I'll go shopping. And
twice a year?
About twice a year.
Now, that seems to be below average somehow or other.
I think my relationship to the mall is probably below average.
Shirley, how about you? You like shopping?
I do not like shopping, and I do not like malls.
Ever?
Rarely. We're going to be talking about what goes on in malls. I don't think they're an unmitigated evil. I find the people interesting there. I often go with my wife, who does like to shop, and I sit and people watch, and I enjoy that, as long as I don't have to buy anything myself.
Do you agree that we live in a kind of consumer society?
I suppose most modern urban societies are consumer societies, so you don't have factory workers, you don't have the farmer, and so on. Trade is going on, and God created us, I don't want to overdo this, but God created us to consume, in a sense. God willed life. God willed what we need to sustain life. And so it's not bad to buy food, to buy shoes, to buy clothes. I wouldn't call that consumerism. It becomes consumerism when it's a matter of accumulating possessions, and it's what Ed was talking about, having more and more. But there's some theological significance to that, too, I think. And I think even that we have to ask why that consumerism is there. And my guess is that it's a sign of hunger. And it may be a legitimate hunger. People think that hunger can be satisfied by having more stuff, which is why I detest malls, all the stuff that's there. But that desire for more is a legitimate hunger, and I think if we try to understand that sympathetically and not just sneer at these consumers, of which that's not us. You talk about somebody else's thing. What are they hungry for, and what would satisfy that hunger? Then you have to begin talking not about what they do in malls, but about what's going on in churches.
What do you think about Shirley? What Shirley is saying there?
Well, I remember at one point really taking a good hard look at the whole upward mobility pressure and the how easy it is to get trapped into that. I've got to move up. I've got to get more money. I've got to up my salary. And then I do, and I begin to live at a higher lifestyle because I got a second home or whatever. And I remember an article written, I think it was by Aubrey Brown, about Jesus and downward mobility. And that really impressed me. And I have felt as though by, in some way, adopting that, and not well, and not to brag about, but I'm running counter to what is the norm. I mean, you said not going to the mall very often. I really have to sort of fight that because it feels like the norm. And so if consumerism is that finding worth by moving up a ladder, by hoping to buy the fancier clothes, and I'm saying this from, a woman's point of view, that you dress better. If that's consumerism, I think that's a real temptation in our world. Now, I do agree that it masks something else. I think it says that our self-worth comes not from God, not from our status as being children of God, but from what we own, what we wear.
There's a passage from Isaiah that I like very much, where the prophet says, "Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. Those who have no money, come buy and eat. Why do you spend your money for that which is not bread, and your labor for that which does not satisfy? Hearken diligently to me and eat what is good. Delight yourselves in fatness." There's a kind of play there on what we think is going to feed us and what will actually feed us. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, except that I don't want to minimize food that feeds us. We are bodies. God created us bodies. there's a kind of asceticism built into us Christians that says you only ought to have what you absolutely need, and if you're Presbyterian, you ought not to enjoy that. You know, as if delight in earthly pleasures is somehow sinful. Obviously, there can be too much of that, but the Old Testament is very earthy in that way, to enjoy the goodness of God's creation. And even Calvin knew that sometimes. He talked about ascetics who said you only should have enough. And then, but what is enough? If you don't wear a silk shirt, should you wear a coarse shirt? If you shouldn't drink sweet wine, should you drink sour wine? You know, and Calvin could talk about enjoying not just having the things we need, but enjoying the good, just for sheer pleasure, the things that God has given us, like smells and colors and so on. So I don't want to be so anti-mall that you get sort of ascetic and we ought to go around in rags and starve ourselves or something of the kind.
But Ed Loring talked in one of his sort of passionate moments about the ability of our culture, and he labelled it particularly a capitalist culture, but the ability to make us feel as though we're in need, that we need more, and that he described that as a spiritual capacity. Now that's very worrying, isn't it? If it's not just a kind of materialistic thing we're talking about here, but actually a spiritual dynamic that's at work in all that advertising. It may be playing off good things, the desire, you know, to eat and to enjoy, but actually there's a spiritual captivity that's involved in that.
Yes.
Lucy, what do you think?
Well, I think it's already infected my 5-year-old. She'll be 5 next Saturday, and she wants a talking dollhouse, because she saw it advertised. And she told us that her Lego blocks are not as good as the bendable ones on TV. And to me, I think it's that craving for more that is not enjoying what we have.
Yeah.
And not saying, I have enough, I'll enjoy what I have. If more comes along, that's fine.
How do we liberate ourselves from that?
Well, Ed's answer, I think, would be to compare what I have with what other people have. I also think that if you're going to talk about what God, the way God created the world, He created the world with the intention that not just I, but all people have enough life and health. And I would say now that we're capable of that, medical care for everyone, education for everyone. And if I become aware of the needs of other people, then that puts a limit on me, what I have, what I must have, and so on. But we're back to a sense now of real community. You know, so that I don't live just by myself to satisfy myself and my family, but we're made for community. And once again, I would see the malls as a kinds of frustrated recognition that we can't live simply alone, but that we need community. And it's trying to find community in a way that can't be found.
That passage from Isaiah suggests that whatever we need, fundamentally, you know, the deepest level of our being, whatever it is that we need, is free. You know, it's a gift to us. Would you like to comment on that?
Well, it's interesting to me that you're talking about community, and I think I take community for granted. What I would say is the deepest need is self-worth. And I think a lot of times other folks take that for granted. I may be wrong about that, but it seems like to me that community and self-worth are free. I mean, they are gifts from God. God puts us in families, and that should be a place of shalom. It's not. It's often not. But we should be worthed as children of God, where we don't claim that often, but I think the way out is to stop and say thank you for what I have. And I think my illness last summer made me do that. And to say, I am very happy with what I have. And the things that I would like I can give to God and let God take care of, rather than having to make sure I get them or do it myself.
Surely, different periods of history, different biblical passages may be more appropriate, and maybe different themes of Scripture are more appropriate. What do you think is God's word to us in our culture in terms of what we've been talking about? Above all, what would you say is the thing that we need to come back to and to hear again?
Well, it sounds like a cliche to say it, but I think that God is a God who willed to have community with us, and created us to have community with each other, in which there's a kind of mutual caring and giving and receiving and listening and helping and letting ourselves be helped. I mean, that works two ways. That's what God created us for. And when you get into economics, then and money and so on, money, work, all of that is not bad in itself. But the question is how you make money, how you got it in the first place, what you do with it, for what purpose you make it, and so on. If you do that for the sake of a wider human community, I could almost say everything twofold with God and with other people. That's what it's all about. Part of the consumerism in our country is connected with the individualism. And maybe that's especially American, that we want to make it by ourselves. We don't want to need anybody. We don't want to have to be dependent on anybody. We want to be self-sufficient and autonomous, like we think God is. And that's the great heresy, a great American heresy, I think.
So that boils down to love God and love neighbor.
Yeah.
Somebody said that one other time.
Okay, my thanks to Shirley Guthrie and to Lucy Rose for joining me to discuss the mall and consumerism in our culture. Thank you for being with us. In our next program, we'll be talking about the body as a sign of our times. Until then, from all of us here, goodbye.